In this tutorial, I'll provide a detailed overview of how dynamics work with Spitfire Audio Libraries. Though I'm using Logic for this tutorial, all of the techniques applied can be used in any digital audio workstation you're using with our products. So first off, what are dynamics? Well, they're the different levels that an instrument can play in terms of low volume and high volume. So how can we trigger these different dynamics with Spitfire Audio Libraries? Well, we program in dynamics in different layers known as dynamic layers. If we look at the back end of Albion 1 and the programming underneath the hood, you can see that the instrument here has 3 different layers. So the quiet layer here, the medium layer here, and the loud layer here can all be triggered by either using the velocity level on your keyboard, or on the interface we can use the dynamic slider here, which is connected to the mod wheel on your keyboard. We have lots of different techniques in our libraries, and generally speaking, shorter techniques are triggered by velocity and long techniques are triggered by the dynamic slider here. So let's have a look at how this works in practice. I've composed a quick piece here, and at the moment I've done nothing to program anything to do with the dynamics, so the piece will sound quite flat. So what can we do to make the piece sound more dynamically interesting? Well, we can use the mod wheel on our keyboard to record in the dynamics, or we can affect this using automation, which is a method I'll show now. So if we open the piano roll by using E on our keyboard, or just using the scissor button here at the top, we can open up the automation lane, and then we can either use track or region automation. You'll want to use region automation if you're using a MIDI keyboard or controller, as this is where the MIDI controls are stored. If you're not using a controller, you can use track mode, but I would advise against this. So let's use the modulation in the region mode. So in Logic, I've got the pencil tool set up as my secondary tool, which can be activated by holding down command, which means I can draw the MIDI information like so. So let's isolate the intimate strings longs and have a listen to how this sounds now. So you can hear we now have a lot more control over the dynamics, and the piece sounds a little bit more interesting than it did previously. So you might be asking what exactly is happening in order for us to trigger those different dynamics. As we're moving the dynamic slider, we're going to be moving in between these volume levels here. So we're going from the piano samples here through the mezzo forte samples and to the top samples, which are forte or loud. As we move the controller up and down, we'll be fading between these different layers. So how can we control this further? Well, we can use the second fader on the interface, which is known as expression, which is here. In Logic, we can open that by using the expression lane within region mode, or if you're in track mode, you can open this up by using the plugin controls and then using expression from the drop down here. If we flip back to region mode, we can then do exactly the same thing that we did with dynamics, but we might want to vary this a bit further. So now we can hear with both dynamics and expression activated at the same time. I'm finding that to be a bit quiet, so what I'm going to do is highlight all of the automation by just lassoing the automation that we've just made, and then just dragging it all up like so to increase the overall volume. I want the peak to be here, so what I can do is redraw this in like so, and now the piece will be at its loudest towards the end. So now I'm happy with the strings part, let's move on to the next part here, which is our lab soft piano. Now, soft piano is a short articulation because we're playing short notes on the piano. It's not possible to hold a note down like you would do with a violin, where you can infinitely sustain a note. The note will eventually decay. So how do we address this in our plugin? At the moment, because we've got the dynamics layer on full, we're not actually activating the different dynamic layers within the plugin. So if I just play the piece now, you'll hear every note at the same dynamic level. So in order to activate the different dynamic layers within this library, all you need to do is pull down the dynamic slider, and now you'll hear the different dynamic layers that we've built into the plugin. So we could use expression as well with the soft piano, but I'm not going to in this instance because the dynamic control provided by the velocity is enough for us to create more variation. So let's move on to the final instrument that I've used in this piece, which is the Abbey Road 1 high woods. For this instrument, I've used a short articulation known as staccatissimo. So let's have a listen to how it currently sounds at the moment. Again, we're not hearing much dynamic variation like the soft piano because we've got the dynamics fader on 100%. So if we pull this down, and if we also go to the region mode automation and draw in our note velocities, we can vary the different note velocities here. So now let's have a listen to what this sounds like with the different velocity layers going in between the Abbey Road plugin. So now you can hear the different velocity layers are triggered, but what if we want to have slightly more control over this and we don't want to edit the individual notes? Well, we can do exactly the same thing as we did before with the dynamics slider. If we go over to the settings of the plugin and then select the dynamics drop down here and then select velocity map to dynamics. So this now means that the short articulation that we're using is now mapped to the dynamic slider instead of the velocity of the different notes. So we can do exactly the same thing that we did with the intimate strings track, go to modulation, and then we can draw in our modulation here. Let's have a listen to how that sounds now. So now that we've finished programming our dynamics, let's have a quick recap of how this sounded at the start of the tutorial compared to how it sounds now. So the same techniques here can be applied to any Spitfire audio library. Short articulations will use velocity unless you change the settings to register this as dynamics, and long articulations will use the dynamic slider, which is attached to the mod wheel on your keyboard or the modulation automation lane in your DAW. If you need more information on how this works, please see the knowledge base article attached in the description below, and also drop a comment on this video if you have any other questions that we can answer.
Thanks for watching Spitfire Clips. Let us know if it was too long, too short, too fast or too slow in the comments down below. Hit like if we answered your question and subscribe for more clips, tips, tricks and exclusive Spitfire content.